Hey folks, welcome back to Only the Best Fantasy Novels. My name is Robin, and today I want to talk about Lord of Emperors, the second book in this Sarantine mosaic by Guy Gavriel K. And just this breathtaking finale, honestly, towards me like just an incredible duology. When I initially finished reading Sailing to Sarantium, like I mentioned, that book, it didn't quite feel like a standalone, and that's the point. Like Sailing to Sarantium sets up quite a bit of story that pays off marvelously in Lord of Emperors. Like this is one of the I think overall in terms of like experiences, this is one of the most powerful Guy Gavriel K books I've read, and like and this is GGK we're talking about. Like that's saying something. I've seen multiple people who were fans of it say like this book is their favorite, and I get it. I absolutely get it. Like this book is just spectacular. Um, like I mentioned, this is the second book in a duology, so if you've read Sailing to Sorrentum, you kind of already have an idea of where this book was headed. But essentially, what happens in this book is a Bassanite physician comes to Sarantia, ostensibly on a quest to gain like knowledge before he assumes his post as a royal physician to the King of Kings. But that's on the surface. In reality, he came to effect a regime change, and naturally, our good friend Caius Crispin is going to get caught up flush in the middle of it in many ways. Um, but for Caius himself, like he's just determined to finish the mosaic that he's building in the sanctuary, and as the story progresses and just these major political events begin to happen, it poses like the I don't really want to talk more about what happens with him, but like, needless to say, he's wrapped up in the politics of this. He's very much working on the mosaic, and interesting things abound. So let's just leave it at that. Like, if you're reading this book, you kind of have to read Sailing to Sarantium first, and yeah. Anyway, let's get straight into talking about the book. So, one of the one of the things I think I have to mention right off the bat, and it's something I always talk about in GGK's book, is the writing. Like GGK is a spectacular writer, but I felt like this one in particular, like he really took things up a notch. I don't know if it's because this is one of his rare series, like his rare heavily connected series. So he had like a larger page count to play with essentially, and that allowed him to do more to kind of spend more time packing more of a punch into like the different scenes and the different moments and the different stories that we get that unfold over the course of this novel. Like there are some scenes in here that are just painted so vividly and imaginatively as they happen. Like they were seared into my brain, and it's been a few days now since I've read this book, and it continues to be seared into my brain. Like it when I think about these moments and what happens with these characters, like it's just like even for a GGK book, it was just next level, basically. Um, but it is very much a book like, and I think part of that, like I mentioned, it because of the fact like it's a second book, it it contains a lot of payoff. Like there's more room to build relationships, and with GGK, you know what that means: politics, love, vengeance, all these things come into play in much more. I felt at least like much more charged ways than if he were to do like just a standalone. Um, I don't remember if I mentioned this in my Sailing to Sarantium video, but this book, this series in particular, it does take place within the same world as like his some of his other books, like the Lions of al-rassan. It's just like a different time frame. So why that's important is because there is like some of the religious schisms and like the religious conflicts and so that we see in Lions of al-rassan, they are very much present here, and that's important because as the story unfolds, like there are some elements there that become very much like an us versus them. Um, it, GGK has some interesting things to touch on, like some social commentary that's kind of baked into this story, um, and we kind of get like a fantastical version of his take playing out in terms of that, like racism, immigration, these kind of things. It kind of touches on, and just um, colonialism, exploitation, like all these things are kind of wrapped up in here in the way that the story unfolds, and it it's kind of hard to describe what I mean, because like honestly, this book, I feel like this book fried my brain to some extent. I'm trying to talk about it. Um, well, I'll just keep moving on. Like this book, one thing I did note about this series in general is that, like, even for GGK, it has some spectacular characters, particularly the women. Um, like from the Empress Aliana to Queen Giselle to Shiriana, like even the dancer, like everyone, like they were just these incredible presences. Um, this story is, I feel like this story is very much the story of the women um, in this world, and the different. Well, and many times it felt mainly driven by the women in this in this saga, and the men just kind of got swept up in the tide. Like some of the most pivotal moments did turn on the decisions and the choices that the women made, and you know, like it was it was a really, it was very interesting to see, because like it's not as clear cut as being, oh, it's either patriarchy or a matriarchy. Like there is very much like a balance of power, but at the end of the day, this is, I felt like after reading these two books, it kind of feels like a very female driven story, um, in all the best ways. In all the best ways. Like we, I don't think at this point I need to talk about GGK's like skill as a writer and the subtlety in which he handles that part of it. Um, yeah, like it was really really incredible. I don't know. Maybe I'm misinterpreting or reading too much into it, but I kind of felt like that was my I kind of felt like the women made the majority. The women were like the crux of this story, and the men just kind of got dragged into it along the way. Um, in many cases, obviously, like they had their own choices and their own impetus and that kind of thing, but it was very much driven largely by the women. So there was that. Um, and I kind of already touched on this, but like I said, with maybe it's just because of like the more sprawling page count, but GGK's writing, like even for him, it felt like this was a bit more spectacular than normal. The more I think on it, the more I think that's indeed the case. He just had like a larger page count to play with, so he was able to just spend a little bit more time on just the characters and the interactions and the scenes and just the way that he crafts things and just the way that he narrates them, and it made this book that much more potent. Like one of the most pivotal scenes in the book is, it was also for me one of the most incredibly written scenes in this entire series, if not among all the GGK books I've read. Like it was absolute top shelf. Like it's in terms of like the actual event that happens, it's a very very common event in terms of like fantasy standards, but I have never read and probably never will read another author portrayed the way that GGK did in this book. Like the guy is just a master, and if anyone comes like tries to argue with me that this guy is the greatest living fantasy author at the moment, I'm not even gonna try to argue that statement. Like, you got somebody backing you up here. Is all I got to say. But yeah, like as I mentioned, like this book and this series in particular is among GGK's more beloved. It may not be as popular as like A Song for Arbonne or Lines of al-Rassan or Tigana, but if I had to put together like maybe a top five, I would have to put these two books right there to make up the five. Like it was just incredible, really incredible. Um, And yeah, I kind of think that's all I have to say about GGK. Um, like, if you're a fan of his, this is absolutely a series you want to read. I, if I had to rank his books, I would still put like The Lions of al-Rassan as my absolute favorite, but only by a very thin margin. Like, this book was, it was an experience. And if you're a fan of GGK, this is a duology in particular you definitely want to prioritize, because it is more among his top. It deserves place more among his top shelf picks. And GGK himself, like, yeah, pretty much everything he's written is already top shelf. So yeah, okay, I think I'm rambling at this point, so I'll just call it there. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.